Hello, I'm Toycat and welcome back to the second channel geography video. This is series where I talk about geography and the world and stuff. And today I wanted to talk about Europe, and particularly I wanted to talk about the EU, because dividing Europe up into different bits is something you've probably worked out is very, very tricky. Where does Western Europe end? You know, what is Northwestern Europe, for instance? Working out the proper divisions between any technical term is really tricky, and especially when you try to make broad statements about them, it can be quite difficult. So I figured, given that the easiest way to divide Europe is into, EU versus non-EU, except even that comes with a bunch of asterisks with the colors on this map, but dividing up, when we take the EU itself, it seems like, well, that's impossible to divide, right? It's kind of like one country, but the truth is there's lots of, mini country groups within the EU that are separate to the rest of them, that I want to kind of explain to help get you a grips on how Europe is divided into lots of different separate bits. So here's 5 ways to divide the EU that you perhaps didn't think of or didn't know about before this video. So hopefully you'll do enjoy it. Let's get straight into talking about how we're going to divide this, and I feel like the first one I want to mention is one of my favorites, because I discovered it because I did a interrail trip, or a very small interrail trip on Europe, and one of the passes you can buy, one of the countries you can buy in the EU rail or interrail pass, is actually called Benelux. So the Benelux Pass is for Belgium, the Netherlands and Luxembourg, which have a historic pass together in the Netherlands as a whole, except now they're 3 separate countries, but they have a historic history together, and because of that they still to this day have very close ties. So in case you're curious, by the way, Belgium and Netherlands are similarly sized by population and by land area, and then there's Luxembourg, which is some people call it a microstate, but it's not really, but it's still a very small country, so it gets some representation. But there is a thing called Benelux. It looks like this. It's very tricky to see on any map. I feel like, seeing on a globe is kind of like that. But the truth is these 3 countries have a lot closer cooperation than the rest of, the EU, I guess, compared to them. So if you wonder what I mean by that, first of all, they all are they're 3 of the 6 founding members of the EU. So there's Germany, France, and Italy that founded the EU together, or West Germany if we're being precise, but the other 3 members were the Benelux states, because they already wanted close cooperation, so the EU kind of made sense for them as a way to also get on board with all this other stuff. So fun fact, that is, they all joined the EU at the same time, and they've all, been a part of the same union since the very beginning, back when it was the European Colon Steel Community. But they also have their own parliament that, it's like a body, it's not called a parliament, but they have their own body, which is elected representatives from each of these places. So there's some people from the Netherlands, some from Belgium, and a very few number from Luxembourg that have a council where they do stuff together. Like I said, you can buy passes across the 3 countries, and yeah, Benelux is a group of countries which I feel like it's best to group these together in some certain situations, because there are a lot of similarities between the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg. In fact, I would say 3 of the most similar countries in Europe are these 3. So if you're going to group any 3 countries together and you're like, okay, there's 28 members of the EU, but we have to take a bunch of them and stick them together, I'd say sticking these 3 countries together isn't that terrible, besides the fact that Luxembourg has the tax thing, Belgium has the chocolate and the whole bad infrastructure thing, and then the Netherlands is the Netherlands, and you have a thought about them already, and you know what that is. So yeah, let's move on to the next where you can divide Europe, which is going to be actually, I know this seems a bit weird, by the Nordic Council. So again, the Nordic Council is something that seems like it's just another one of those councils, right? If you ever looked up the Nordic Council, it's a thing, and it's so they have a council together. Really, you're gonna say that's a thing? And although I'd say Nordic countries by themselves is a really good way to distinguish Europe, because if you've ever been to these countries, they have a lot of similarities to each other. The truth is the Nordic Union, the Nordic Council, actually kind of was a Nordic Union before it was a council, but still kind of is. So basically, back when back after World War II, these countries figured they could get together and make a defense union. Finland, Sweden. In case you're curious, by the way, Scandinavia is these 3 countries. The Nordics is all 5 of these countries. So Iceland, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Finland. Just in case you're curious, it also includes their territories, which is Greenland, which is most of the land area of the entire thing, but then also the Faroe Islands and the Åland Islands and a few other places like that. And then the Baltics sometimes come along and they watch, but they're not a part of it. But let's talk about the fact that the union started as a defense union, but Finland, because until the end of the Cold War, officially Finland was meant to stay neutral. They weren't allowed to be part of a defense pact with the rest of the Nordic Union. So we're going to have to pass on that. But what they could do is they could make a passport union. So they all, because they're all similarly, let's just say, rich countries, they all had a passport union where they could all live in each other's country, just to make things easy. Again, the free movement of labor, I feel like no one can disagree that even if you are very against free movement of labor between countries with very, very similar high-level economies, it works quite well. So they had that until the Schengen area existed, which they're now all a part of. Even Iceland, which isn't in the EU, and either is Norway, by the way, which is funnily enough, again, they're 2 of the little green things on this map because they're not EU members, but they are members of the Nordic Council. Again, looks like this, and therefore they're all close together, and therefore they have a bunch of weird privileges of each other, and there is actually a tiny part of this union. In the same way, there's a tiny part of the EU which actively is driving for the United States of Europe now. There's an active part of the Nordic Council which is driving for a Scandinavia, just Scandinavianism now. They want a just Scandinavian country that goes from Finland to Sweden to Norway to Iceland. And although it's not a majority of the population, it's not like this tiny 1%, 2% minority like you get with some independence movements. It's like a real like thing that could happen at some point. And although it's unlikely, it's like, like I'm sure like the European Union as it was today was seen as unlikely at one point. So the Nordic, Union is a real way to divide Europe because these countries are similar to each other. Besides they all use the crown besides Finland, which uses the euro. They're different crowns, of course, like Swedish crown, Danish crown, Norwegian crown, and Icelandic crown, but they all have a similar system in how they're done. Actually, Iceland's different, but anyway, there's similarities between their currencies, besides Finland. There's similarities in how they are as countries, and if you look at their geographic position, I mean, it doesn't take a genius to see how that's similar. So, yeah, let's move on to the next way that you can actually divide Europe up. Also, I should mention, this is the list of all the bodies that can actually, like, observe them, so it includes a little bit of Germany, it includes all the Baltics. They're, like, they can listen in, and they, like, it's a weird body. Like, look up the Nordic Council sometime. It's a fascinating little thing. They have, wait, actually, they have their own website, and it's like, I don't know, is that like the measure of how something's cute? You might have seen this in a different video. But yeah, they got their website where they just tell you things about their council and what they want to do and stuff. And there's like so much going on here. And yeah, Nordic Council, real thing. If it has a website, it must be a real country idea. So let's move on from that to talk about the next one here. So let me just zoom in a little bit. In case you're curious, by the way, I cropped the screen a bit. So if I talk about something that's in the corner, that's why. Like, I'm not just talking about an imaginary place. It's that I can see it and you can't. It's terrible. So let's move on to the next example of ways you can divide Europe, which is actually going to be the Visegrad Group. So I actually might be pronouncing that horribly wrong, because I've only read it, which really says that I'm like really intelligent because I read books. I'm joking on that. That's like a common internet thing, right? But yeah, basically the Visegrad Group is these countries right here. So it was 3 countries, now it's 4 countries. Obviously Poland, obviously Czechia, or the Czech Republic if you want to be that way, and there's Slovakia, so and Hungary. So these 4 countries, previously 3, because Czechoslovakia was 1 until recently, have had historic ties since literally 14th century, I guess it would be. These countries have ties going back to like 1335, I think the date is. Like literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years ago, they all met to like have some economic, cooperation and a little bit of like foreign power cooperation. It goes that deep with these countries, and yeah, they're all very similarly incomed. They're all very similarly historied. Again, kind of thing where like Central European power right next to Germany, eh? Wonder how that went for them. Oh, Cold War comes in and now the Russians are here, and oh, now they're forced into communism. They've had like the similar struggle, and similarly enough, they all had the similar they're having the similar climb out of that struggle. So they all joined the EU in the same time. This is the 2004 enlargement of the EU. Notice how it just includes the Visegrad Group, as well as Slovenia and the Baltics, and also Cyprus, as it turns out. Little island down there, we'll get to that later. But the thing is all 4 of these countries have like that similar history. They all joined the EU at the same time, and honestly, I'll be like, the way our media portrays it is like they're all slightly more, the way it's portrayed, at least as I can tell, and like some of the media I've read, is like, oh yeah, they really don't like immigrants, right? But I read a comment, and although, this is like a debate that I'm not going to get into, I found it to be enlightening that it was like, the reason that these countries are so against it, the reason me as a Hungarian really dislikes immigration is because, dislikes people coming in, is because we had this like huge struggle of like a foreign power being in, and like now the EU telling us we have to accept refugees against their will. I saw the parallel. I was like, okay, compare it to communism, and it's like kind of bad like that. Maybe that hits you in the heart. Maybe you go, no, that's stupid. But I read the comment and I was like, okay, I see your perspective on that one. And it's not often that YouTube comments change your perspective on something, and there you go, there was one that did. So that was a member of the Visegrad Group. There are 4 countries, similarly like medium-ish economies. So in terms of like compared to Western Europe, they're lower, but compared to some of the parts of Europe, particularly further Eastern Europe and the Balkans, they're fairly high income. In fact, the GDP per capita in particularly Czechia is higher than that of Greece. In fact, all of them are higher than that of Greece. And there's a fun fact you might not have known. So whether I don't know if you think Greece is like high income or not, but yeah, particularly Czechia, because it's the furthest west of all the countries, of all the things. Prague at one point was like known as like, I know, it's because it's like one of the biggest cities of all of them. It was like known as like the big city of like partying at one point, and now it's apparently not. And I don't know, I always thought that was confusing because I never knew it when it was known as the big city of like cheap partying, but that was a thing it was known for at one point just after that. So with that said, that was entirely irrelevant to everything else. I just wanted to give you a tip that I learned when I was in Prague that didn't make any sense. Let's move on to the next way that you can divide the EU, which is actually going to be islands. So this seems a little bit weird, right? Like, dividing the EU into islands, by the way, this is EU, including EEA, and this is just all of Europe right here. There's actually a lot of islands in Europe. And the interesting thing about islands, they, again, help you to understand maybe why some parts of the EU should, like, why the multi-layer process they use, you know, I think it's called Different Speed Europe, is actually a really good idea, because there's a bunch of islands in Europe, because, you know, most of Europe, when you picture the EU, you picture mainland, but there's actually a bunch of islands. And obviously the big example, the UK and Ireland. Wow, look at those huge islands. They're like separate by like 20 miles or something. But obviously there's a bunch of other islands, including most countries, besides the landlocked ones, have some form of islands, and these are separate to the mainland. There's like a ferry or a thing that needs to go there, and I found this to be a fascinating thing. I've just realized, like, oh, for the record, 4 of the EU members and an extra EEA member are actually island countries. Cyprus, EU member, but it's an island all the way basically in Asia. Like, it's not in Asia, but it's basically in Asia. Can we agree that when it's right there, it's basically in Asia? That's like offensive to some people. I'm sorry again. We've got like Gibraltar, which isn't an island, but again, it's like right here, and it's like, ooh, that's a weird one. We've got all these Spanish islands, which are technically a part of Spain and Portugal, respectively. But you know, they're like all the way out there, technically EU part. We've got the islands of basically. My point is there's a lot of islands in the EU, and you don't realize that, like, oh, that's like, what, 20% of the membership, and, you know, like, yeah, fun fact you don't really usually think about. Lots of islands, most countries have them, and applying the same rules to the islands as you do to the thing, it's just something when I first realized that, like, there are islands in the UK alone. Like, the UK is an island, or Great Britain is an island, and then, like, Great Britain has islands, and then those islands have islands, and then some of those islands have islands. So, like, that's how the it's a crazy process. Maybe you disagree with that. Maybe you think I'm just standing like a stone or something, but it is something to think about. So the last way to divide Europe, which, by the way, technically isn't the EU, but it is the future EU, is the Balkans. So the Balkans, obviously, a lot of them used to be one country. There's like 7 countries right now that used to be one. But the Balkans are a really interesting place to, I guess, understand at the very least. Because the newest members of the EU, in fact, this is a video I was going to make at some point. The newest members of the EU are going to be Serbia and Montenegro. There's 2 countries like fairly deep in the joining process. But this map helps you to understand, one, where the Balkans is. It sometimes includes Romania, always includes the rest of these countries. Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia, blah, blah, blah. We got a bunch of countries here, and all these countries had a lot of, like, they were more consolidated in the past. They have a similar history of, like, deep conflict, in particular with Kosovo and with Serbia. There's been, like, wars as recent as the last 20 years, last 10 years. It's like, you know, well, I guess it'd be like 20 years now, yeah. I'm sorry, dates are hard. But, yeah, basically the Balkan region is a really important one to understand, because some of the Balkans are members of the EU, and they do quite well from it, and some of the Balkan members are not members of the EU and doing bad for that. And the worst one, yeah, the red there, which, like, yeah, the potential member country, is Kosovo. And yeah, I feel like understanding that, like, there are some parts of Europe where, like, even though, you know, it's Europe and we're known as, like, a high-income continent, where everything goes, like, to, let's just say, to shit, you know? Like, there's Kosovo, where it's like, oh, yeah, well, you know, there's some great stuff in Kosovo, but you know, the military, there's a lot of, like, you know, underfunded stuff there, because, as you can probably expect from being an unrecognized country with a very, you know, the Kosovo-Serbia thing. I'm not mentioning it. If you're Serbian in your comments now going, Kosovo is Serbia, don't you dare. I'm not mentioning the status. I'm just saying there is a country or maybe country there. Same thing with Moldova. Basically, understanding the regions of Europe is important. The Balkans are a region. Understanding the difference between them. Understanding they all had a common past as one country, most of them at least, is important. And the rest of them had like they all had a common communist past, I guess you could say, besides Greece. There's like all these common areas of Europe that understanding will help you understand a bit more. And there was 5 examples. So I hope you did all enjoy this video. I guess the second channel. I want to mention before we go though. First of all, I put some of these videos on Reddit, and if you just like want to discuss something there, it's a really good way, because like I said, YouTube comments, it's very rare you find an insightful one. But if you want to leave a comment and you want to guarantee I'll see it, I see, I think, everything on the Reddit, so reddit.com/r/toycat. And second of all, the Flatter thing, flatter.com/@ibxtoycat. It's a really cool, a lot of people have signed up and said they liked it, so flatter.com/@ibxtoycat. If you sign up there, it's like YouTube Red, but a subscription to the entire internet. And if you have that turned on, you can pick where that like subscription goes. So it's a good way to actually support content, but rather than supporting the one piece of content that asks you to, you can support everything. So rather than just supporting me, I could just say like, oh, go to my Patreon, go to my donations. I don't have either of those things. But instead it's like, oh yeah, if you do this, then you can support everything with that one you know, like that one weekly thing, and or one monthly thing. And if you put a $10 a month contribution down, after 3 months, I believe I get some form of bonus for signing you. So if you like the idea and you want to give me $10, because you're not giving it to me, they give it to me, flash.com/@IVXToyCat. So thank you very much for watching today's video about the EU. Let me know in the comments down below if you think there's another way, because I didn't mention the Baltics one, which is important, but let me know if you think there's another important way to divide Europe that I missed there clearly, because this is just 5 really important ways to help you understand a bit more about how the EU can be spliced into regions, but very, very, very carefully. But yeah, thank you very much for watching. Second channel, don't care. Bye.